Before I begin this video, which I prepared several days ago, I'd like to comment on what happened today in Washington. It is obvious to all my listeners that we are engaged in a full-fledged cold civil war. It is a war of ideas. The ammunition is communication. Our side tries to win through education, through promoting our ideas and the correctness of our views. The other side ostensibly does the same. However, being that the views they espouse are moronic and incoherent, they need to engage in lies, manipulation, and suppression of the ideas of their opposition. Many are struggling to properly name the two sides. Is it conservatives and progressives, socialists and capitalists, Republicans and Democrats, religious and secular, believers and atheists, right and left, etc., etc. Actually, none of these descriptions are entirely accurate, and they surely do not capture the essence of this battle. That is why I prefer to call it a battle between the forces of clarity and the forces of darkness and confusion. The inspiration for our side is the Torah, to which righteous Jews, Christians, and Muslims turn to for guidance. And upon its axioms, this blessed country of ours was founded. The inspiration for the other side comes from the primordial serpent, whose greatest weapon is falsehood and the manipulation of the minds of the innocents. Today is another example of how the party of darkness and confusion under the leadership of the serpent plays its game. A huge turnout, estimated to be over 100,000 people, came to Washington today to peacefully protest against what they felt is the silencing of any effort to objectively investigate who exactly won this election. As in every large group, there are always some bad apples. A relatively small group of people who have not yet been identified stormed the Capitol and engaged in acts of violence, which have, at this point, not been clearly described. In any case, the president immediately took control of the situation, and every single conservative commentator condemned these actions in the strongest terms. And what does the brilliant Joe Biden have to say? Democracy is under unprecedented assault. Why? Because 100,000 people came to peacefully protest against you stealing the election? And less than 0.1% of that total, who are as yet unidentified, went wild? Contrast this with the violent protests which raged for months this past year in hundreds of cities across the country, in which thousands of businesses were destroyed and lives ruined. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods were stolen. Hundreds of people were wounded and 19 people were killed. During that long and dark period, the party of darkness and confusion did everything to suppress the truth of what was really going on, and either actively or passively justified the violent thugs of BLM, since they were merely expressing their rage against systematic racism that does not exist in this country. I heard no such justifications from our side today. Yes, there is a lot of rage against a rotten court system that refused to even take a serious look into voter fraud and irregularities. It does not feel good to be disenfranchised and condemned in the most vulgar language for the crime of demanding an honest and transparent election. But regardless of the justified rage, all Republicans and conservatives declared in a loud and clear and unified voice that violence and disrespect for law enforcement officials is completely inexcusable. Do you remember the brilliant comment of the eminent governor of New York when he was asked at a press conference, why is it okay for thousands to demonstrate with BLM without social distancing and without masks, but 10 Jews who want to pray together in a synagogue, or 10 Christians in a church, or 10 Muslims in a mosque cannot do so even with social distancing and even with masks? To which his honorable genius replied something like this: How could you compare the importance for these people to express their rage over 400 years of systematic racism to the importance of a bunch of people coming to pray? So it is okay to risk your own life as well as the lives of others to express rage over non-existent racism, but it's not okay for American citizens to express their rage for being completely disenfranchised and having their votes effectively thrown in the garbage. What a difference between us and them. I surely hope that this silly episode by a handful of stupid people will not in any way dampen the resolve of our president and the good Republicans in Congress to continue the justified and moral fight for honesty and integrity in this election. And now to the message I prepared several days ago. This video is made possible through the generosity of Joseph Aminian. May Almighty God shower him with abundant blessings and with success in all his endeavors. If you would like to partner with us or sponsor a video, please drop us an email at torahprophecies@gmail.com or look in the description of this video for details. Some of you have asked me why I am only 99% sure that President Donald Trump will lead the American people for another 4 years. What is the source of my uncertainty? The obvious answer is that even though I have spent many years studying biblical prophecies, and I have successfully predicted the outcomes of the past 2 presidential elections and several other important events, there is always room for human error. The not so obvious answer is that even if I were 100% certain that my understanding of the prophecies is correct, there would still be room for uncertainty. Prophecies are often not set in stone, and they are deliberately worded in a way which allows several interpretations. It is actually the actions of people which sometimes determine which interpretation is correct. The famous example of this is the prophecy that God told Jonah in chapter 3 of his book. 40 days and Nineveh will be overturned. The word overturned has 2 possible meanings. Literally, it could mean it will be turned upside down and destroyed like Sodom, where a similar word is used in Genesis chapter 19, Vayahafoch es ha'orim. It could also mean that it will be spiritually overturned, meaning that the inhabitants will repent and turn over a new leaf, in which case they will be spared. And that is exactly what happened. Now, kings and world leaders do not always have free choice. As stated in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1, Pal gemayim leiv melech biyad Hashem, al kol asher yachbetz yatenu. The heart of a king is like streams of water in God's hand. He inclines it to whichever direction he desires. The Midrash comments, just as water in a glass can be tilted in any direction, when a man raises to the throne, his heart is in the hands of God. If the people are worthy, God inclines the heart of the king to be good, and if not, etc. Nonetheless, we do find that in certain cases, certain kings did have free choice. Thus, the ball may be in the president's court, and therefore I cannot predict the outcome with certainty. I will elaborate on these concepts in the form of a personal message to our president. I doubt the president will see this video, but as the Talmud states in several places, for example, Tractate Sanhedrin 94a, the soul often hears what the body does not. Dear President Trump, many people, even those who consider themselves your friends and supporters, have urged you, for the sake of your legacy and for the sake of the future of the Republican Party, to graciously accept defeat. In an opinion piece for the Washington Post published this past Sunday, all 10 living former defense secretaries, half of them having served Republican presidents, declared the 2020 presidential election over and said that any effort to involve the U.S. military in resolving election disputes would take us into dangerous, unlawful, and unconstitutional territory. It was also reported on Sunday that the effort to overturn the presidential election was condemned by an outpouring of current and former GOP officials, warning that the effort to sow doubt in Joe Biden's win and keep President Donald Trump in office is undermining Americans' faith in democracy. The senators wrote that further attempts to cast doubt on the election are contrary to the clearly expressed will of the American people and only serve to undermine Americans' confidence in the already determined election results. The Republican governor of Maryland said, "Scheme by members of Congress to reject the certification of the presidential election makes a mockery of our system and who we are as Americans." Former House Speaker Paul Ryan, a Republican, said in a statement that Biden's victory is entirely legitimate and that efforts to sow doubt about the election strike at the foundation of our republic. Can anybody explain to me why a thorough and fully transparent investigation into all allegations of fraud and a forensic audit of all voting machines led by a bipartisan investigative committee would take us into dangerous, unlawful, and unconstitutional territory? Undermine Americans' faith in democracy? Is contrary to the clearly expressed will of the American people? Would only serve to undermine Americans' confidence in election results? Would strike at the foundation of our republic? These statements are not only wrong, they are completely incoherent. A thorough investigation is actually the one and only way to uphold the foundation of our republic, restore Americans' faith in democracy, undo the mockery this election has made of our system and of who we are as Americans. I am certain that you, Mr. President, are ignoring the advice of all those who are encouraging you to surrender. As long as there is any possibility of bringing to light the honest results of this election, you will not capitulate to the mobs who are fighting to disenfranchise the millions upon millions of American citizens who do not trust the results reported thus far by the states. In this video, I'd like to strengthen your resolve and bless you, in the name of all my listeners, to experience God's salvation. I would like to begin by sharing an amazing biblical prophecy in which you played a major role. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, the angel informs him that Jerusalem will be controlled by Muslims for 3.5 time periods. But the angel did not disclose how long each time period is. God wanted this information hidden so that the Jews do not despair in the knowledge of the long duration of their exile. A similar thing is recorded in the Torah portion Jews read this week in synagogues throughout the world. In Genesis chapter 49, it begins by telling us that when our father Jacob was on his deathbed, he called all his children to his bedside. He told them that he wished to reveal when the Messiah will finally come. The Bible then goes on to record the blessings he gave them, but nothing is mentioned about the time of redemption. Our sages explain that Jacob began to reveal the end time, but God instructed him to stop. So he went on to the next thing on his agenda, which is to bless his children. The reason is the same as in Daniel's case. God wanted this information hidden so that the Jews do not despair in the knowledge of the long duration of their dark and bitter exile. However, now that we have reached the end of this period, God has allowed us to crack this code. It is actually quite simple. The time period the prophet is referring to is a solar year. The length of a lunar year fluctuates, so it is not useful to use in these calculations. A solar year is fixed at exactly 365 1/3 days. In the Bible, sometimes a day means a year, as in Leviticus 25:29. Thus, 3.5 of these time periods would give us 1,278 years. Remember that number, 1,278. Now, let's review some history about Jerusalem. In the year 63 BCE, General Pompey conquered Jerusalem, and henceforth Jerusalem was incorporated into the Roman Empire. Parenthetically, I find it quite interesting that the person you appointed as your Secretary of State, and thus the one who carries out your foreign policies, including your policy pertaining to Israel, and of recognizing Jerusalem as its capital, has a name that sounds so similar to the guy who took Jerusalem away from the Jews 2,083 years ago. I wonder if Pompeo is Pompey's reincarnation, and he has come back to rectify his soul. Interestingly, Mike Pompeo was the 70th Secretary of State of the United States of America. Jerusalem was recognized as the capital of Israel by your government on the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the State of Israel. And you, Mr. President, were 70 years young when you became our president. God willing, I will discuss the significance of that number in a future video. In any case, In the year 639, one of the most powerful and influential Muslim caliphs in history, Umar, wrested Jerusalem from the Romans, and henceforth Jerusalem was controlled by Muslims until World War I. It was then that Lord Allenby, who led the British Empire's Egyptian expeditionary force, took it from the Islamic Ottoman Empire during a campaign that ended on December 30th, 1917. Thus, Jerusalem was in Islamic hands for exactly 1,278 years, exactly as the angel told Daniel 2,395 years ago. Actually, not exactly. You see, Christian crusaders took Jerusalem away from the Muslims twice. The first crusade, proclaimed by Pope Urban II, took control of Jerusalem from 1099 until 1187 for a total of 88 years. And the Sixth Crusade held Jerusalem from 1229 until 1244 for a total of 15 years. Thus, even though the British took Jerusalem from the Ottomans in 1917, the Muslims were still entitled to another 103 years of domination over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And that's exactly what happened. The British, who favored the Arabs and were quite miserable to the Jews, allowed the Muslims to keep control of the Temple Mount and severely limited Jewish access even to the Western Wall, which is actually outside the perimeters of the Mount. When the Jews established the State of Israel in 1948, after defeating 5 Arab states who tried to extinguish the nascent state, they were Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, the Jews did not retake Jerusalem. It remained in Jordanian Islamic hands until the Six-Day War in 1967. However, even after the Jewish state took control of Jerusalem, they refused to take control of the Temple Mount. They allowed the Muslims to retain administrative control of the place that the Jews consider the holiest place on earth. Moshe Dayan was defense minister during the Six-Day War. He was a secular Jew and clueless regarding the significance of the Mount. He decided to allow the Muslims to retain control of the mountain, referred to by the Arabs as Al-Aqsa. Even though the Jews technically had sovereignty over the Mount, for all intents and purposes, the Muslims retained control. Jews were severely limited from ascending the Mount, and those that did were barred from uttering even one word of prayer. And that is how it remained. Now, even though the Jewish state granted the Muslims full control of the Temple Mount, the fact that, at least on paper, it was under Jewish sovereignty has been the focal point of the Islamic desire to crush the state of Israel for the past 50 years. Arafat's goons, who carried out scores of suicide attacks against Jews, were designated as the Al-Aqsa Brigades. The Second Intifada, initiated by Arafat in 2000, in which over 1,000 Jewish men, women, and children were butchered by his thugs, was designated as the Al-Aqsa Intifada. The root of the resistance of even moderate Islamic states to normalize relations with Israel was also centered over control of the Mount. One wonders why. It seems so incomprehensible. Why would they be willing to sacrifice so many lives for control of a site that they already have de facto control of? But on a spiritual level, it makes perfect sense. The guardian angel of the Muslims was well aware of the details I am sharing with you tonight. That, as the progeny of Yishmael, they were entitled to have full and absolute control, and not only administrative control, over the Mount for 1,278 years. He wasn't going to let anybody get away with shortchanging his earthly charges. Now here is where you, Mr. President, come in. By the year 2020, the 103 years the Muslims were missing from the 1,278 years promised to them by the angel in the book of Daniel were completely repaid. Once the guardian angel of the Arabs was satisfied that God's promise revealed to Daniel was fulfilled, he allowed Arab states to enter into the Abraham Accords and establish full normalization with the state of Israel, even though the Temple Mount was still technically in Jewish hands. And you, Mr. President, were chosen by God to facilitate the peaceful reconciliation of the two sons of Abraham, Isaac and Yishmael. As I have elaborated upon in previous videos, it is my understanding that there are several biblical prophecies that predict that at the end of days, the most powerful country in the world will be the leader of the Western Christian civilization. Here's to the mighty Roman Empire. And at its helm will stand a great leader who embodies the soul of his great ancestor, Esau, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, the father of all monotheistic religions. The negative traits of his ancestor Esau will by then have been completely expunged from his soul and taken root in the souls of the enemies of this great leader. The division of Esau into two opposing forces was concretized many years ago. In the year 2255 from creation, which is 1506 BCE. That is when our father Jacob passed away and was accompanied by his family and a large entourage of Egyptian nobles to the cave of the patriarchs in the city of Hebron in the Holy Land. The story is recorded in Genesis chapter 50, read by Jews in synagogues the world over this past Saturday. The Bible does not record every detail, but we have an ancient tradition passed on to us, generation after generation, which adds an interesting detail. It occurred as Jacob's children were about to bury him. Esau showed up and attempted to block the burial of his younger brother. He claimed that he and his brother inherited the cave from their father Isaac. Now, since there were only 2 burial plots left, and Jacob had already buried his wife Leah in one of them, the second spot belongs to him, to Esau. To make a long story short, a violent fight erupted during which Esau lost his head, literally. It rolled right into the cave and onto the lap of his father Isaac. Jacob's family saw this as a sign from above, that Esau's head belongs there. So they left it there and sent his body back to be buried in Esau's territory east of the Jordan. The Zohar explains that Esau's head, the seat of his soul, was holy and therefore deserved to be interned in the cave. It was his body which he defiled due to the overwhelming dark forces lurking in his heart that had no place in the presence of the holy people resting in that cave. That episode foretold the complete severance of the holy part of Esau from his unholy side, which was destined to occur at the end of days, as prophesied at the end of Daniel chapter 12, verse 10. And as we have mentioned many times, you, Mr. President, and the God-fearing Americans you represent are manifestations of the good soul of Esau, and your opponents represent his unbridled, selfish, and egotistical heart. As mentioned, the prophecies indicate that the good guys will be led by a great leader who will stand up for God, for morality, and for the Jewish people in the Holy Land. And this great leader will witness the downfall and the humiliation of the dark forces which seek to eradicate God and morality from mankind. And as you have already started this process, it makes perfect sense that you should be the one to complete it. But it is not set in stone. In the previous video, I quoted from Genesis chapter 36:43, where the final leader of Western civilization is named Aluf Iram, Chief Iram, who is destined to help the Jews rebuild the Third Temple. You may very well be that leader. As I pointed out, Aluf Iram has the numeric value of 437, which is exactly the same numeric value as your name spelled in Hebrew, Donald J. Trump. However, you may also choose to forfeit this historic opportunity. You see, Mr. President, every major historic event is encoded in the Torah. But since man has free choice, and God does not want to force the outcomes, all possibilities were encoded. If you, Mr. President, prove to be the final and righteous chief of Edom, the code I discovered will prevail. If not, another code will be found with someone else's name. As this may seem odd to you, please allow me to elaborate on this idea by retelling the story of 2 great Jewish kings and 1 great Jewish queen. Please be patient, as it is extremely relevant to you today. 2 of the 3 were destined for greatness, but they failed the test. Only one rose to the challenge and is remembered with reverence for all eternity. Saul was chosen by God through the prophet Samuel to be the first king of the Jewish people. That was in the year 879 BCE. His story is recorded in the book of 1 Samuel and is a tragic story. As the prophet testifies, he was a spiritual giant of a man with flawless credentials, thoroughly righteous, impeccably honest, and as humble as they come. He had everything one would look for in a great leader, and that is precisely why God chose him. His short reign of 2 years ended tragically with his death and the death of 3 of his 4 sons. The kingdom was ripped away from Saul's family for good, and it was passed on to King David and his progeny for all eternity. Now, where did Saul go wrong? The details are not relevant. Suffice it to say that when it came to assert his authority and do away with the wicked Agag, king of the Amalekites, as he was explicit to do so by the prophet Samuel, Saul showed weakness and misplaced humility. He submitted to the advice of those who counseled him to spare the wicked king. Agag lived just one more day. The following day, Samuel personally rid the world of this evil dictator. But during that one night, while in prison, Agag managed somehow to sire a child. The child was the ancestor of the wicked and infamous Haman, who seemed to annihilate all the Jews in the civilized world in the time of Mordecai and Esther. The lesson, Mr. President: follow your conscience. Do what you know is the will of God without fear or hesitation. Use every means legally at your disposal, regardless of how radical and unprecedented. God is on your side. Never follow the advice of your weak advisors who attempt to convince you otherwise. The next king I want to discuss was considered the most righteous in the Davidic dynasty. His name was Hezekiah. This is how the Bible describes him in 2 Kings chapter 18. He trusted the God of Israel. No other king of Judah, earlier or later, was like him. He was completely devoted to God and did not turn away from him. He kept the commandments which God had instructed Moses. God was with him, so he succeeded in everything he did. Hezekiah took the throne 2,582 years ago at the age of 25 and reigned for 29 years. In his time, the ancient Assyrian Empire dominated the Middle East. Their dominion encompassed present-day Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. It was in the 14th year of Chizkiyahu's reign that Sennacherib, son of Sargon II, marched on Judea with 185,000 men. After taking a number of towns, he besieged Jerusalem. Hezekiah went to the Holy Temple and prayed to God for salvation. God sent a message through the prophet Isaiah that the king's prayers were heard and that Sennacherib would not enter the city. That night, his soldiers were mysteriously stricken dead. Sennacherib departed crestfallen and returned to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. He was duly rewarded for his blasphemy. While he was worshipping in the temple of his pagan god, he was assassinated by his own children. Interestingly, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, often referred to as the father of history, who penned his works 2,500 years ago, also records the failure of Sennacherib's siege on Jerusalem, and it is also corroborated in an ancient prism dating back to the time of Sennacherib and discovered in archaeological digs in Nineveh in the early 1800s. There are 3 of them on display in various museums today. You could check out the details in Wikipedia under Sennacherib's Annals. They describe in detail all of Sennacherib's wars and victories. They mention Hezekiah by name as well as the siege on Jerusalem, but they omit the outcome. Obviously, Sennacherib would not allow them to record his humiliating defeat, but neither could he fabricate a victory that never happened. In any case, mysteriously missing from the biblical account is any prayer of thanksgiving offer by Hezekiah in appreciation of the great miracle that saved his kingdom. Our sages have clarified that Scripture does not record a song of thanksgiving because there was none. And this was a grave error on the part of the king. It was also revealed to our sages what was going on in the mind of God. King Hezekiah was so righteous that he was destined to be appointed as the King Messiah. As we have mentioned in previous videos, it was predicted that before the coming of the Messiah, the mighty armies of Gog from the land of Magog will march on Jerusalem and miraculously be defeated. Sennacherib would have filled the role of Gog, and the miraculous elimination of his army would have been reckoned as the fulfillment of the miraculous defeat of the armies of Magog. But King Hezekiah failed the test, and was thus denied the role of the most important king in the history of mankind, King Messiah. Jewish thinkers were mystified why this righteous king failed to acknowledge and thank God for the miracle that saved him and his kingdom. One of the great Jewish thinkers of the 18th century, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, the first Rebbe of the Ger Hasidic dynasty, who passed away in 1866, suggests the following. The great and righteous king was always cognizant of the innumerable and spectacular miracles that are going on all the time. When he gazed at the universe, he pondered the staggering amount of enormously complex, miraculous phenomena needed to sustain every star, every planet, every creature, every plant, and every cell, every single second. Thus, in the eyes of King Hezekiah, it would have been offensive to praise God for the miracle of taking out Sennacherib's troops, a miracle which is completely eclipsed by all the unfathomable miracles God is performing every single second. But it was a mistake. He should have realized that most Jews are not on his level, and for them, celebrating this miracle would be very inspiring. Regardless of his thinking, he failed. When it comes to such an eminent role as that of King Messiah, there is no second chance. It is beyond our comprehension how that mistake could have been the cause of all the suffering endured by the Jews, as well as the rest of mankind, due to the fact that the redemption did not come in the days of King Hezekiah. The destruction of the first temple and Jerusalem, which occurred 125 years after the above event, the destruction of the second temple and Jerusalem, which occurred 616 years later, hundreds of thousands of Jews were massacred both times, and millions more during the long and dark exile we have yet to fully exit. But the lesson is clear. When God performs miracles, the purpose is to reveal the truth, that this world is not a jungle, that somebody is in charge, someone who demands from us to lead moral and righteous lives. If we fail to recognize these miracles, then we don't deserve to experience them. Our dear President, the entire saga of your presidency, beginning with your success in rising to the most important position on this planet, and your success in remaining in power while all the mighty forces of the left were working overtime to remove you. Your enormous accomplishments, both domestically and in foreign policy, are above and beyond the norms of nature, and we must acknowledge in all of that the hand of God. And we must also acknowledge the truth, even before it unfolds, that your imminent success in overcoming all odds and bringing to light that you are indeed the rightful winner of the current election will also be an act of God for which we will be forever grateful. The last great leader I would like to talk about is a woman, the famous Queen Esther, who saved the Jewish people from the savage plot of the wicked Haman to annihilate all the Jews in the Persian Empire. The book of Esther chapter 4 tells us that Esther's cousin Mordechai, who was the leader of the Jewish people, became aware of Haman's plot. He then met with the queen and instructed her to approach King Ahasuerus and to beseech him to annul the decree. Esther initially resisted. She said she was putting her life on the line by approaching the king without being summoned. And this is the gist of Mordechai's reply to her. I am 100% certain that God will protect the Jewish people and destroy the wicked Haman. I am also convinced that you were put in the position of being the queen of the Persian Empire for this specific purpose, to intervene on behalf of your people. If you rise to the challenge, you will succeed, and you will be remembered for all eternity for saving our nation. If you decline, God will find somebody else, and you will have brought eternal shame upon yourself and your family. Unlike the previous two male kings, Queen Esther rose to the challenge, and she is one of our greatest heroes for all eternity. The lesson is clear. When God puts us in a position to courageously stand up for what is right and just, the last thing we are to be thinking of is ourselves. Many people, some perhaps well-meaning, have had the audacity to threaten you that if you did not give up your futile attempt to hold on to the presidency, you will tarnish your reputation forever, and you will cause irreparable harm to the Republican Party. But as a great leader, you are not focused on your future legacy. You will do what needs to be done with courage and resolve, and with absolute faith that God is on your side. Let's move on. The Talmud reveals that before every soul descends into the body, it stands before the heavenly court. They administer the following oath. You are descending to a place of darkness and temptation. The body you are about to enter has been pre-programmed to put itself before others, to put instant gratification above long-term success, to put its bodily desires before the desires of the soul. You will not have it easy. To make it even more difficult and challenging, you will also be very biased. You will think that you are very righteous, and many of your peers may indeed encourage you to think that way. But you should never put down your guard. The serpent in your heart does not die. He simply waits for the opportune time to take charge of your life and destroy your chances to succeed in your godly mission. Be strong, because we assure you, you will ultimately win. God cannot be defeated, and thus, there is no doubt that you will eventually fulfill the destiny He has reserved for you. But you will have the free will to determine how quickly you meet your destiny. Your soul may have to return several times, after several failed lifetimes, until you eventually succeed. Therefore, we ask you now to take an oath, which will give you the fortitude to succeed in the lifetime you are about to start. The epic battle between those who have succeeded at least to some degree to lead godly and moral lives, and those who have given up and wish to take down mankind with them, is raging right now in America. Therefore, Mr. President, please do not be upset at those who you feel are abandoning you. The forces they are up against are indeed formidable. But let me share with you a secret. These massive forces of darkness aligned against you are actually non-existent. You heard me correctly. Nothing, absolutely nothing, exists independently of God. There is no power that can defy God. There is no Satan and there is no Lucifer. It is fake news. All there is darkness and confusion that is created by God in order to allow us to have free choice. It has no independent existence and no power to defy God. All the dark forces of the left are completely subservient to God. And as soon as He stops bringing them into existence, they will revert to nothingness. As stated clearly and unequivocally in Deuteronomy chapter 4, to the Jews who experienced the revelation of God at Sinai, Ato harei soladas ki Hashem hu Elokim einoid milvadoi. Ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim imal v'al ha'oretz mitochas ein oid. You have been shown the truth, that Hashem is the God of the universe, and there is nothing besides Him. In the heavens above and on the earth beneath, there is nothing independent of God. Should you place your trust in God, Mr. President, and use every power that our Constitution has bestowed upon you, there is hardly a chance that you will not succeed. Every path of victory should obviously be utilized, but we must not put our trust in man, not in the Supreme Court and not in Congress. Our trust, Mr. President, is in the God of the universe. He will be the one and only one to choose the agents he will use to bring us victory. In summation, Mr. President, we are standing at a major junction in the history of civilization. This election is not about your legacy. It is not even about the future of America. It is not even about the future of the free world. It is about standing up for God of the universe, the God of morality and compassion, the God of justice and honesty, and the God who keeps his word to his prophets. I encourage you, dear Mr. President, to continue the fight until you have exhausted every available means at your disposal to overcome the enemies of truth. Do not listen to anyone who tries to convince you otherwise. That was King Saul's mistake, and we saw where that got him. And most importantly, it is not enough to keep your faith in your heart. That was Hezekiah's mistake, Hezekiah. A mistake that had disastrous implications. You must publicly give credit to our Father in heaven for bringing you to where you are today, and who will be there for you until victory and beyond. Before heading out to a justified war, the Torah instructs the high priest to address the soldiers as recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 20. Listen, Israel, today you are about to wage war against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted, do not be afraid, do not panic, and do not break ranks before them. Ki Hashem Elokeichem hu ahoylech imochem, liilochem lochem imoyevechem loishia eschem. God, your Lord, is the one who is going with you. He will fight for you against your enemies, and he will deliver you. If there is any man among you who is afraid or faint-hearted, let him go home, rather than have his cowardliness demoralize his brethren. Don't be afraid, Mr. President, to take this battle till the end. There is nothing to fear. The forces you are up against are like a cloud of darkness that has no real substance. You can blow them away with the power of your faith in the Almighty. Rise to the challenge, and may God be with you. And to you, my dear listeners, thank you for listening. Please click on the like icon below and subscribe if you have not already done so. And please check out our partnership opportunities in the description below. Until next time, Hashem imochem, may God be with you.